The air in Boulder that April morning carried the crisp scent of pine and melting snow. Sunlight slid over the Flatirons, painting the city's sandstone peaks in gold. It was 6:43 a.m. when Brooke Sanders laced her running shoes and stepped out of her small apartment near University Hill. She adjusted the band of her Walkman, hit play, and let a soft indie tune accompany the rhythm of her heartbeat. Brooke was 21, a journalism student at the University of Colorado. Friends described her as someone who always smiled first and thought later, a mix of relentless curiosity and unshakable optimism. Her roommate, Katie, half asleep under a pile of blankets, murmured, "You're crazy for running this early." Brooke laughed, tossing back, "Discipline, Katie. Pulitzer winners don't sleep in." Outside, the world was still quiet. A few joggers shared the path up toward Chautauqua Park, nodding politely as they passed. The grass still held traces of frost. Birds chattered from the cottonwoods, and the sound of distant traffic hummed faintly from Baseline Road. Brooke's breath puffed into the cold morning air as she picked up her pace, thinking about her article due that afternoon, an investigative piece on environmental reforms in Boulder County. Halfway up the trail, she paused, stretching near a wooden bench carved with initials. She looked down at the valley below, the sleepy rooftops, the silver streak of Boulder Creek. For a moment, everything felt suspended, calm, safe, ordinary. Brooke didn't know that several people would later recall seeing her near that spot. A couple walking their dog, a cyclist heading toward the Flatirons, a groundskeeper starting his shift at Chautauqua. Each would remember the same thing, the flash of her red jacket disappearing into the trees. By 9 o'clock, when Brooke hadn't shown up for class, no one was alarmed. Not yet. Her journalism professor assumed she'd overslept. Katie sent a quick text. No reply. At noon, she called, straight to voicemail. It wasn't until early afternoon, when Brooke's editor from the student newspaper asked for her article, that worry began to ripple. By 5 p.m., Katie stood on the porch, dialing the police with trembling hands. The officer on the line took the report calmly, almost mechanically. Another missing college student. Maybe she went on a trip, he suggested. But Katie knew Brooke. She wouldn't vanish without a word. Not Brooke. That evening, the sun set behind the Rockies, and Boulder's sky turned the color of rust and violet. A patrol car rolled past the trail entrance where Brooke had last been seen. Its headlights cut through the darkening trees, sweeping over empty paths. In the quiet hum of night, the first flyers began to print. Missing. Brooke Sanders, age 21. Last seen April 12, 2003, near Chautauqua Park. Before the world knew her name, before the cameras and the interviews, there was only a trail, a red jacket, and silence. And that silence would haunt Boulder for decades to come. If you're drawn to stories that uncover hidden truths and give voice to the forgotten, stay with us. This is only the beginning. By the next morning, the calm that usually wrapped Boulder's early hours was gone. The local police department received the official missing person report at 8:12 a.m. And by noon, the story of a vanished college student had spread across the university campus. Flyers with Brooke's smiling face were taped to lampposts, coffee shop windows, and the notice boards near the student union. Her parents, Marianne and Tom Sanders, arrived from Denver before sunset, exhaustion already carved into their expressions. Detective Laura Reeves stood by the patrol car outside Chautauqua Park, scanning the trail that cut into the foothills. She was a methodical woman in her late 30s, known for her precision and calm authority. That morning, her instincts whispered that this was not a case of someone simply getting lost. 21 years old, fit, experienced runner, she murmured to the officer beside her. People don't just vanish in daylight. Volunteers poured in, students, faculty, local hikers. They formed lines combing through brush and ravines, calling Brooke's name. The air was sharp and dry, the wind carrying the sound of their voices down the slopes. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors cutting through the silence that had replaced the usual hum of the park. Katie watched from the trailhead, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hadn't slept since the night before. When Detective Reeves approached, Katie spoke in a rush. She always ran this path. Same time, same music. She was careful. She never took rides, never went off trail. Reeves nodded, scribbling notes. Did she ever mention anyone bothering her? Any recent arguments? Katie hesitated. She mentioned a guy from her journalism class. Ryan, I think. Said he was persistent. Back at the Sanders temporary headquarters, a small room at the local community center, Marianne paced between folding tables covered in maps and photos. "She's out there," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "My daughter is out there waiting for us to find her." Tom squeezed her hand, his face pale but steady. "We're not stopping, Marianne. Not tonight." As daylight faded, search teams returned empty-handed. The police marked off an area near the trail where a single shoe print was found, though it matched several models. No phone, no music player, no jacket. The local news aired a brief segment that evening. University student missing in Boulder. Community joins search. That night, Boulder slept uneasily. Parents called their daughters. Dorm lights stayed on longer than usual. In the newsroom of the student paper, Brooke's empty desk glowed beneath the fluorescent lights, a half-finished article still open on her laptop screen. Detective Reeves lingered at the station past midnight, reviewing maps and timelines. Every detail gnawed at her: Brooke's routine, her route, her absence of warning. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. She closed her notebook, eyes narrowing at the map pinned to the wall. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we widen the perimeter." And though no one knew it then, the search for Brooke Sanders had just crossed from a missing person case into something far more haunting. By the end of the first week, Brooke's name had become a headline, a photo, a question on everyone's lips. The flyers had faded under the spring sun, edges curling, but her image lingered everywhere, her confident smile, her bright green eyes, the girl who had everything going for her. Brooke Sanders wasn't just another student. At 21, she was the kind of person who made people believe in purpose. Professors described her as sharp, fearless, always raising her hand with one more question. Her journalism advisor, Professor Lang, recalled the last conversation they'd had in his office. She wanted to expose something big, he told reporters. Said she was working on a story that would make people listen. Her friends knew her as someone who never stopped moving. Between classes, part-time shifts at a local bookstore, and her commitment to the university's student paper, Brooke seemed to live two lives at once. One ordinary, one driven by a hunger for truth. Katie often teased her, saying, "You're like Nancy Drew minus the blue roadster." Brooke would laugh and reply, "Well, someone's got to shake this town awake." But beneath that determination was a quiet unease. A few days before she vanished, she'd been distracted, checking her phone constantly. Ethan Miller, her boyfriend and fellow journalism major, noticed it first. When Detective Reeves met with him in the dimly lit conference room at the police station, Ethan's hands wouldn't stay still. "She told me she might transfer," he said, eyes darting to the window. "Said she needed a change, somewhere far from here. I didn't think she meant right away." Reeves leaned forward. "Did she say why?" "She didn't trust someone on campus," Ethan answered after a pause. "She wouldn't tell me who." Reeves took a slow breath, jotting the words carefully. It wasn't much, but it was something. A new thread in a web that seemed to stretch in every direction. Outside the station, the mountains loomed beneath heavy clouds. Rain had begun to fall again, thin and cold, blurring the view of the Flatirons. Reeves watched it for a moment, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Brooke had been smart, careful. A girl like that didn't just disappear without leaving a trace. Someone knew more than they were saying. That evening, Marianne and Tom Sanders sat in their hotel room surrounded by stacks of photos. Brooke at her high school graduation, Brooke smiling on a hiking trail, Brooke at the newsroom with ink-stained fingers. Marianne traced her daughter's face on a photo, whispering, "She was supposed to come home this weekend." Tom looked up, his voice rough. "They'll find her, Marianne. Someone out there knows something." Outside, sirens echoed faintly through the streets, mixing with the hum of late-night traffic. Detective Reeves closed her notebook and pressed her palms against her temples. Every witness painted Brooke as perfect, bright, ambitious, kind, but perfection had a way of hiding cracks, and somewhere in those cracks, she knew, lay the truth. Whatever Brooke Sanders had been chasing before she vanished, it was more dangerous than anyone had realized. The third week after Brooke's disappearance brought a shift in tone. What began as collective concern had turned into whispers, theories and fear that lingered in every conversation around Boulder. The coffee shops that once buzzed with laughter now echoed with quiet speculation. "They still haven't found her?" someone would ask. "No trace at all," another would answer, shaking their head. The police continued their work, but progress was painfully slow. Detective Laura Reeves felt the weight of public pressure pressing against every report, every unanswered call. She stood before the media that Monday afternoon, cameras flashing as she stated firmly, This investigation remains active and ongoing. We are following multiple leads. But even she could feel the skepticism in the air. Behind closed doors, the department was divided. Some officers believed Brooke had left voluntarily. Others suspected foul play. Reeves refused to choose a side until the evidence spoke, but it wasn't speaking at all. The trail was colder by the day. Ethan Miller had become a focal point for both the press and the police. Reporters parked outside his apartment, waiting for a statement. Students whispered his name in hallways. He stopped attending classes, avoiding the campus entirely. When Reeves called him in again, he sat rigid across the table, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "You said she was thinking about transferring," Reeves began. "Did she tell you where she wanted to go?" He shook his head. "No, she was different those last few days, distant. Like she was afraid of something but didn't want to drag me into it." Reeves studied him carefully. "You're aware people are talking, Ethan. Some think you know more than you're saying." His jaw tightened. "If I did, don't you think I'd tell you? I loved her, Detective. I'd give anything to see her walk through that door." After he left, Reeves stayed seated for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from her. Emotion clouded truth. She'd learned that long ago, but Ethan's pain seemed real. Still, instincts whispered that there was more to his story. Meanwhile, Marianne Sanders gave an interview on local television, pleading for information. "Please," she said, voice trembling. "If anyone knows anything at all, come forward. My daughter deserves to come home." Her words struck the city like a pulse of grief. But empathy had limits. Online forums began to spread rumors, claims of secret relationships, of Brooke's double life as a student journalist digging into sensitive topics. One anonymous post even named Ethan directly, fueling the frenzy. Reeves printed the forum posts, laying them out across her desk. They were full of speculation, but buried among them was one peculiar detail. A user claimed Brooke had been meeting a source for her article in the days before she vanished. The name wasn't clear, but it was something new, a thread to pull. As darkness settled over Boulder once more, Reeves circled the name in red ink, her pen pressing hard into the paper. If the city was turning on itself, she needed to find the truth before the noise buried it completely. Summer arrived in Boulder, but the air around the Sanders family never warmed. The search for Brooke, once alive with urgency, had grown quiet. Flyers were replaced by festival posters. Volunteers stopped calling. What had been a daily headline was now a fading story, tucked behind local news about city budgets and campus renovations. Detective Laura Reeves still drove the winding road up to Chautauqua once a week. The trailhead looked the same, lush, green, deceptively peaceful. Each visit reminded her of the same unsettling truth. There was no new evidence, no trace of Brooke. The last confirmed sighting remained that morning in April, over 3 months ago. At the police station, the whiteboard, once covered in names, leads, and possible sightings, now stood nearly blank. Reeves leaned against her desk, flipping through the thick case file. She paused at the photo of Brooke in her red running jacket. "You didn't just vanish," she whispered, her voice thin against the hum of the air conditioner. Her partner, Officer Daniels, walked in holding a folder. "We got the lab results back. The samples from the trail, nothing usable, contaminated, too old." Reeves didn't answer. She had stopped expecting breakthroughs. The Sanders family refused to give up. Marianne launched the Find Brooke Foundation, organizing community events to keep her daughter's name alive. "Someone knows what happened," she told reporters, standing before a wall of candles and photos during a vigil at Pearl Street. Her voice trembled but never broke. "We won't let her be forgotten." Ethan attended the vigil, standing quietly in the back, hands buried in his jacket pockets. He avoided eye contact with the press, though whispers followed him wherever he went. Once the golden boy of the journalism department, he had become a shadow. Katie found him outside afterward, sitting alone on the curb. "You should go home," she said softly. He shook his head. "I can't. I still dream about her every night." Katie hesitated. "Do you think she's alive?" Ethan's answer came after a long pause. "I used to." Weeks turned to months. The case officially went cold that October. Detective Reeves fought against it, filing appeal after appeal for more funding, more hours, but the department had moved on. "It's not a priority anymore," her captain said. "No new evidence, no reason to keep it open." That night, Reeves sat alone in her car, overlooking the city lights, her badge resting on the dashboard. She replayed every interview, every call, every lead that had led nowhere. There was something missing, something small, invisible, but she could feel it pressing at the edge of her mind. In the Sanders living room, Marianne kept Brooke's room untouched. Textbooks still lined the desk, a half-finished cup of paintbrushes sat by the window, and a note on the corkboard read, "Don't forget to call Mom." Life in Boulder moved on, but beneath the calm surface a quiet ache remained. The case had gone cold, but for those who loved Brooke Sanders, the search never truly ended. And deep down, Detective Reeves knew some stories don't stay buried forever. The mountains hadn't changed, but Boulder had. What was once a quiet college town had turned into a polished, tech-driven city filled with boutique shops, yoga studios, and cafes serving oat milk lattes. Yet for many who'd lived there in 2003, one thing hadn't faded: the memory of Brooke Sanders. Her face, frozen in time at 21, still appeared on faded posters, tucked behind bulletin boards and pinned in forgotten corners of the university library. Detective Laura Reeves, now retired, stood outside the same police station where she had filed her final report on Brooke's case 2 decades earlier. The building looked smaller than she remembered, its walls worn by time. She adjusted the strap of her leather bag, feeling the ache in her shoulders, and told herself she was only here to drop off a few old documents. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Inside, the station buzzed with new faces, officers young enough to be her grandchildren. She was met by Detective Carl Hayes, one of the department's newer recruits. "Detective Reeves," he greeted, shaking her hand. "Or should I say Ms. Reeves now?" She smiled faintly. "Laura's fine. You said you needed to talk about an old case." He led her into a small conference room and slid a folder across the table. "We've been running genetic matches through the new federal DNA database. One of the samples from the 2003 Sanders case just hit." Laura froze. For years she had imagined this moment, but she had stopped believing it would ever come. "You're sure?" "Positive," Hayes replied. "The lab confirmed the connection this morning. It's preliminary, but the DNA belongs to someone in the system. A male, late 40s now. He lived in Boulder in 2003. Laura sat back, the weight of 2 decades pressing down on her. "After 21 years, she whispered. Brooke's trail just came alive again." Across town, Marianne Sanders sat in her garden surrounded by blooming lilacs. Her hair had turned silver, her hands slower, but she still checked her phone every morning for updates that never came. That afternoon, when the call from the Boulder Police Department finally arrived, she almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was young, polite, uncertain. "Mrs. Sanders, this is Detective Hayes. We've reopened your daughter's case. We may have found something." For a long moment, Marianne couldn't speak. Then she said quietly, "You found her?" "Not yet," he replied. "But we might be closer than ever." That night, the story broke on local news. After 21 years, new evidence emerges in the disappearance of University of Colorado student Brooke Sanders. The headline spread quickly, stirring memories that many had buried. At home, Laura pulled Brooke's file from her attic. Yellowed pages, faded photographs, her own notes scribbled in the margins. The scent of dust filled the air. She whispered to herself, "It's time to finish what we started." Outside, thunder rolled over the Rockies. After 21 years of silence, the story of Brooke Sanders was waking up again, and it was only the beginning. Rain poured over Boulder that Friday morning, streaking the glass windows of the police department as Detective Laura Reeves stood beside the evidence table. The room smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Spread out before her were folders, lab reports, and a small sealed bag marked Item 47B, Chautauqua Trail. Inside it, a fabric fragment she had seen countless times before. But this time it meant something different. Detective Carl Hayes entered, carrying a fresh report. "The lab finalized the genetic trace," he said, his tone sharp with energy. "It's a confirmed familial match. The DNA from the fabric belongs to a relative of a man named Ryan Kessler." Laura frowned. "Kessler? That name doesn't appear in any of the original witness lists." Hayes nodded. "That's the strange part. He attended the University of Colorado in 2003, same department as Brooke, journalism." Laura's pulse quickened. "He was one of her classmates." Hayes slid a photo across the table, a yearbook shot of a young man with shaggy brown hair and a crooked smile. "He moved to New Mexico in 2005, no criminal record. Nothing remarkable since. For 21 years the case had been silent. Now with a single genetic thread it was speaking again." Laura took a deep breath. "Let's contact him, quietly. No leaks until we know what we're dealing with." Meanwhile, Marianne Sanders sat at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Detective Hayes explain the update. Her fingers tightened around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. "So you found someone connected to her?" she asked carefully. "Possibly," he replied. "We're still confirming details, but the evidence is strong." Marianne's voice broke slightly. "After all these years, are you saying this could lead to her?" Hayes hesitated. "It might." Across town, reporters began to circle. The whispers had started again. New DNA, a possible suspect. The reopening of Boulder's most haunting mystery. Social media flooded with old photos of Brooke, her face paired with headlines reading, "Breakthrough in 2003 Cold Case." Ethan Miller, now a journalism professor in Denver, saw the story pop up on his phone between lectures. His chest tightened. He hadn't spoken about Brooke in years, but her name still carried a weight that never faded. He stared at the article for a long time before calling the Boulder Police Department. "This is Ethan Miller," he said quietly. "I think I can help." That evening, Laura sat in her small apartment surrounded by stacks of old files. The hum of rain outside felt steady, almost rhythmic. She studied Brooke's photo, still the same bright smile frozen in time. She whispered, "We're close now, aren't we?" Her phone buzzed. It was Hayes again. "I tracked down Kessler's current address. He's been living under his own name. Works at a local paper in Taos." Laura stared at the address glowing on her screen, the years collapsing into a single, sharp moment of clarity. "Then it's time," she said. "Let's go find out what Ryan Kessler remembers." For the first time in 21 years, the investigation was alive, and it was leading straight into the past. The drive to Taos took nearly 7 hours. The road wound through mountains and valleys that seemed untouched by time. Laura Reeves sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon while Detective Hayes drove beside her. The case file rested on her lap, a constant reminder of the girl who had haunted her dreams for 21 years. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" Hayes asked, glancing at her. Laura didn't look up. "I've waited 2 decades for this conversation. I'm not letting anyone else have it." They arrived in the late afternoon, the sun low over the desert. The address led them to a modest house on the edge of town, a faded blue structure with wind chimes that clinked softly in the dry air. Ryan Kessler answered the door, older now but unmistakable. His once boyish features were hardened, and his wary expression spoke of someone used to looking over his shoulder. "Mr. Kessler," Laura said, her tone calm. "We're from Boulder Police. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Brooke Sanders." His face tightened. "That was 20 years ago. Why now?" "Because," she replied evenly, "we finally found something that points back to you." He hesitated before stepping aside. "You'd better come in." The interior of his home was neat but sparse. Books lined the shelves, journalism manuals, local newspapers, a few framed photos. Laura noticed one picture of him and a group of college students, Brooke among them, smiling with a notepad in her hand. The sight made her chest tighten. She took a seat across from him. "You studied journalism with Brooke. Tell me about your relationship." Ryan's jaw flexed. "We were classmates, friends, I guess. She was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. Always digging where she didn't belong." "Did you meet with her before she disappeared?" He looked down, fingers drumming on the armrest. "We talked a few days before she went missing. She was nervous. Said she'd found something big, and wanted my advice." "What kind of something?" Hayes asked. She wouldn't say, just that it involved someone on campus. She thought people were watching her. Laura leaned forward. "Did she seem afraid of anyone in particular?" He hesitated. "She mentioned Ethan once. Said he'd been acting strange, but I don't know if that meant anything." The air in the room grew heavy. Laura could feel Ryan's unease, his avoidance. There was more he wasn't saying. She pressed gently. "Your DNA was found on an item recovered near the trail where she vanished. Can you explain that?" His eyes flicked up sharply. "That's impossible." "The lab doesn't think so," she said. "Maybe it's time you remember what happened that week." He stood, pacing, his voice rising. "You think I had something to do with this? You've had 20 years to find your answers, and now you show up here accusing me." Laura remained still, her voice low but firm. "I'm not accusing you, Ryan. I'm giving you a chance to tell your side before the evidence does it for you." For a moment, he said nothing, then quietly, "You don't know what you're getting into." Laura met his eyes. "Maybe not. But I'm about to find out." And with that, the silence between them deepened, thick, charged, and filled with the weight of everything still unspoken. The following morning, Laura sat in the small motel room just outside Taos, reviewing every note from the interview. The desert air outside was cool, the kind that carried a silence too heavy for comfort. She replayed Ryan Kessler's words in her mind. "You don't know what you're getting into." It wasn't denial, it was a warning. Detective Hayes knocked softly on the door before entering, holding a folder. "The lab confirmed it," he said. "The DNA from the fragment matches Kessler exactly, no doubt." Laura exhaled, staring at the ceiling. After 21 years, it's him. Hayes hesitated. "You think he's capable of it?" She paused before answering. "Guilt changes people, but fear hides them." They returned to the local precinct later that morning, coordinating with the Boulder department to issue a formal interview warrant. As they filed paperwork, Laura's phone buzzed. It was Marianne Sanders. Her voice was trembling but calm. "Detective Reeves, they're saying you found the man responsible. Is it true?" Laura's voice softened. "We're not there yet, Mrs. Sanders, but we're close. I promise you that." Meanwhile, word of the reopened case spread like wildfire. True crime podcasts dissected old interviews, college forums reopened long-buried discussions, and online sleuths began digging into Ryan Kessler's life. What they found only fueled the storm. Old photos of him and Brooke in class projects, smiling in groups, often standing just a little too close. When the formal interview resumed, Ryan's lawyer sat beside him, stone-faced. Laura began slowly, methodically. "Ryan, your DNA was found on an article of Brooke's clothing recovered in 2003. How do you explain that?" Ryan's expression hardened. "I already told you we worked together. Maybe she borrowed something, maybe it transferred. You're twisting 20-year-old evidence." "You said you only talked days before she vanished," Laura countered. "That doesn't explain why your DNA was found near where she was last seen." Ryan looked away, his jaw clenched. "I didn't hurt her." "But you were there," Laura said quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, whispering for him not to answer further. After the session ended, Hayes turned to Laura in the hallway. "He's hiding something. You saw it." "I saw guilt," she replied. "The kind that's been festering for years." Back in Boulder, Ethan Miller watched the coverage on his laptop. Ryan Kessler's face filled the screen. His hands trembled as he paused the video. "It was him," he muttered to himself. He remembered the night before Brooke disappeared, a tense conversation outside her apartment, the sound of raised voices, the look of fear in her eyes when she mentioned Ryan's name. Ethan reached for his phone and began dialing. "Detective Reeves." "It's Ethan. There's something I never told you." Laura listened closely as his words came through the static. Her grip on the phone tightened, pulse quickening. Whatever secret Ethan had kept for 21 years, it might finally expose what really happened on that April morning, and why Brooke Sanders never came home. The truth was no longer buried. It was knocking at the door. The interview room was silent except for the faint hum of the air vent. Ryan Kessler sat across from Detective Laura Reeves, his shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the table. His lawyer had stepped out for a moment, leaving behind a silence that seemed to stretch forever. Laura watched him carefully, noting the tremor in his hands, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "You said you didn't hurt her," Laura began quietly. "But you were there. That much we know." Ryan's lips parted, but no words came. His voice, when it finally emerged, was low and strained. "You don't understand what happened. It wasn't supposed to go that way." "Then explain it to me," Laura said, her tone steady. "Help me understand." He rubbed his palms together, staring at the floor as if searching for courage. "Brooke called me that morning. She said she'd found something for her article. Something about a faculty member taking money from a local developer. She wanted to meet at the trail before class. Said it was safer to talk there." Laura's pulse quickened. "You met her at Chautauqua?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, we argued. She didn't trust me anymore. Thought I'd told someone about her story." He paused, voice cracking. "I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. She said she was going to the police if anything happened." "What happened next?" Ryan's eyes glistened. "She turned to leave. I reached out, just to stop her, to make her listen, and she slipped. The ground was wet from the night before. She fell, she hit her head on a rock." His voice broke. "It was an accident." "I swear it was." Laura's expression didn't change. "You left her there." He shook his head violently. "I panicked. I tried to wake her up, but she wasn't moving. I didn't know what to do. I thought they'd never believe me. So I— His words trailed off into silence. So you hid her, Laura said, finishing for him. Ryan buried his face in his hands. I dragged her off the trail, down near the ridge. Covered her with branches. I thought I'd go back, but I couldn't. Every day I told myself I would, but I didn't. And then it was too late. Laura leaned back, the weight of his words pressing against the years of unanswered questions. Why not come forward? 21 years, Ryan. You let her family suffer all this time. He looked up at her, tears streaking down his face. Because I couldn't live with what I'd done. I tried to move on, but she never left me. Outside the room, Detective Hayes watched through the glass, jaw tight. The confession was everything they'd been waiting for, yet it didn't feel like victory. Laura gathered her notes, her voice soft but firm. We'll recover her remains and her family will finally have peace. But you'll have to face what you ran from. Ryan nodded weakly. I know. As Laura stood to leave, he spoke again, barely audible. She was right about one thing, he whispered. Someone was watching her. Laura froze, turning slowly. What do you mean? Ryan met her eyes, a shadow crossing his face. She wasn't just afraid of me. The room fell silent again, but now the silence carried something darker, something unfinished. 2 days after Ryan Kessler's confession, a search team was dispatched to the foothills near Chautauqua Park. The spring air carried a chill, and a thin mist hung over the trees as officers moved methodically through the undergrowth. It had been 21 years since Brooke Sanders disappeared, but the trail that once grew cold was alive again. Detective Laura Reeves stood at the edge of the ridge Ryan had described, her boots sinking into damp soil. She had walked this ground countless times in 2003, searching, hoping, failing. Now the air felt heavier, as if the land itself had been holding its breath for 2 decades. A call came from below. Detective, we've got something. She descended the slope carefully, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and relief. The team had uncovered what appeared to be fragments of fabric, red, faded, but unmistakable. A moment later, an officer uncovered a silver bracelet engraved with the initials BS. Laura felt her throat tighten. It was hers. By the afternoon, forensic units confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. The remains found belonged to Brooke Sanders. News spread quickly through Boulder. Crowds gathered near the park entrance, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Reporters filled the sidewalks, their voices subdued for once. The headline swept across national outlets. Remains of missing student Brooke Sanders, found after 21 years. At her home in Denver, Marianne Sanders received the call she had both prayed for and feared. The detective's voice was gentle but clear. We found her, Mrs. Sanders. We're bringing her home. Marianne sank into a chair, the world spinning around her. For a moment there were no words, only the sound of her own breathing. Then came tears, quiet and unending. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on her. That evening, a vigil was held at the University of Colorado. Hundreds of candles illuminated the campus lawn. Former classmates, professors, and residents of Boulder stood together in silence as Marianne took the stage. Her voice trembled, but carried strength born from years of waiting. For 21 years I woke up hoping to hear her footsteps again, she said. Now I know she's finally at peace. Brooke was more than a story, more than a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, and a light this world needed. Thank you for keeping her memory alive. In the back of the crowd, Ethan Miller listened with tears in his eyes. He had lived with guilt for years, questions he never asked, fears he never voiced. As the crowd began to sing softly, he whispered to himself, I'm sorry, Brooke, I should have done more. Later that night, Laura returned to the ridge one last time. The trail was quiet, the city lights glowing faintly below. She looked out toward the dark silhouette of the Flatirons and felt the years lift, piece by piece. We found you, she said softly into the wind. We finally found you. But even as the truth brought closure, Laura couldn't shake Ryan's final words. She wasn't just afraid of me. And in that echo, the mystery didn't end. It shifted quietly into something deeper. The trial began 6 months after Brooke's remains were discovered. The courthouse in downtown Boulder was crowded with reporters, students, and townspeople who had followed the case for decades. Outside, rain slicked the stone steps, reflecting the swarm of cameras and umbrellas. Inside, the air was heavy with silence. Ryan Kessler sat at the defense table, pale and subdued. His confession had been enough to charge him with obstruction of justice and concealment of a body, but not with murder. The evidence supported his claim of an accident. Still, the weight of his choices hung over the room like a shadow. Detective Laura Reeves sat among the spectators, her expression unreadable. 21 years of unanswered questions had led to this moment, yet she felt no victory, just the quiet ache of resolution. Marianne Sanders took the stand first. Her voice trembled at the beginning but steadied as she spoke. For 21 years I didn't know if my daughter was alive or gone. I woke up every day waiting for a call that never came. And now that I know, I still wake up thinking of her. She paused, looking directly at Ryan. You could have told us. You could have ended our suffering. You didn't. Ryan lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. Ethan Miller was next. His testimony was calm but raw. Brooke was fearless, he said softly. She wanted to expose corruption, to tell the truth no matter the cost, but she trusted people too easily. That's what made her brilliant, and what made her vulnerable. He swallowed hard. For years, I blamed myself for not protecting her. But now, I understand that truth always finds its way out even if it takes 21 years. The courtroom was still. Even Ryan seemed to flinch. When the verdict was read, there was no applause, no gasps, just the sound of rain against the windows. Ryan Kessler was sentenced to 9 years in prison. The judge's words were stern, but somber. What you did may not have been premeditated, but it was unforgivable. You robbed a family of peace for 2 decades. Justice may come late, but it comes nonetheless. After the hearing, Laura met Marianne outside under a grey sky. It's over, Marianne said quietly. Laura shook her head. Not over, but it's done. They stood there in silence for a long moment before Marianne whispered, You kept your promise. You found her. That evening, the university held a memorial in Brooke's honor. A scholarship in her name was announced, funded by the Find Brooke Foundation, to support investigative journalism students dedicated to uncovering the truth. Ethan spoke briefly, his voice strong but filled with emotion. Brooke believed stories could change the world. Maybe in the end hers did. As the sun set over the Flatirons, the crowd lit candles, their glow flickering against the darkening sky. Laura watched from a distance, feeling the quiet closure she had chased for years finally settle around her. Yet, beneath that calm, Ryan's final words echoed faintly in her mind. She wasn't just afraid of me, and though justice had been served, Laura knew, some truths still waited in the dark. The courtroom was quieter than usual on the day of sentencing. The storm outside mirrored the tension within, rain tapping softly against the tall windows as everyone waited for the judge to return. 21 years of grief, anger, and unanswered questions were about to find their legal conclusion. Ryan Kessler sat motionless at the defendant's table, his hands folded neatly, his eyes empty. He had confessed, pleaded guilty, and now faced the final measure of consequence. Behind him, a few former classmates watched in silence, faces marked by disbelief that someone they once knew had become a ghost of his former self. Detective Laura Reeves stood near the back, her expression calm but distant. This moment was supposed to bring closure, but closure, she had learned, was never clean. Justice didn't heal. It only marked the end of the pursuit. The judge entered, his robe trailing the faint scent of old paper and rain. When he spoke, his tone was measured, deliberate. Ryan Kessler, he began, you have admitted to concealing the death of Brooke Sanders, depriving her family and community of truth for more than 2 decades. While the evidence supports your claim of an accident, your actions afterward were deliberate, cowardly, and cruel. He paused, the sound of thunder rolling faintly beyond the courthouse. You will serve 9 years in state prison. You will also participate in a restorative justice program as part of your sentence. This court hopes that in the years ahead, you find the courage to confront what you did, not just the act but the silence that followed. Ryan didn't look up. He only nodded once. When the gavel struck, the sound reverberated through the room like a closing door. Marianne Sanders exhaled slowly, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the bench. After so many years, the words "case closed" felt both like relief and punishment. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, their microphones catching the rain. Marianne faced them briefly, her voice soft but resolute. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. And after all this time, we finally have that. Ethan Miller stood nearby, watching as she was escorted to her car. He approached Laura quietly. Do you think she believes that? That this is justice? Laura glanced at him, her eyes heavy. "I think she believes it's all she'll ever get." They stood in silence as the rain eased to a drizzle, the city lights glowing faintly through the mist. For the first time in decades, Boulder felt still. Later that evening, Marianne returned home to a living room filled with flowers and letters from strangers. She sat down with a cup of tea and stared at Brooke's photo on the mantel. "It's done, sweetheart," she whispered. "You can rest now." But even as she spoke, a faint unease lingered in her chest, an echo of something unresolved. Back in her office, Laura opened the case file one last time. Ryan's words played over in her mind. "She wasn't just afraid of me." The phrase had become a splinter she couldn't remove. Justice had been served, yes. But truth was a different kind of sentence, one that didn't always end in court. Autumn returned to Boulder with its quiet beauty. Golden leaves brushing the sidewalks, a chill in the air, and a calm that only comes after a storm. For most people, the Brooke Sanders case had finally found its ending. But for Detective Laura Reeves, endings were never that simple. She walked across the university campus one evening, the same campus Brooke had once called home. Students hurried past with laptops and coffee cups, unaware that 2 decades earlier, this place had lived through a wound it would never fully heal. The university had built a memorial near the journalism building, a bronze plaque engraved with Brooke's name. Surrounded by wildflowers, someone had left a folded note beneath it that read, "Thank you for teaching us to keep asking questions." Laura knelt beside it, brushing away a fallen leaf. She had seen countless memorials in her career, but this one felt personal. Brooke wasn't just a case. She was a reminder of what truth costs when it's buried too long. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. "I didn't think you'd come." It was Ethan Miller. His hair was streaked with grey now, his expression gentler but still shadowed. He had become a respected journalist, though the case had changed the way he wrote. Less ambition, more honesty. Laura stood. "I needed to see it for myself," she said. Ethan nodded. "I come here every year. Makes it easier to remember the good parts, not just how it ended." For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the wind ripple through the flowers. "I read Ryan's appeal," Ethan said finally. "He's claiming coercion, that his confession was forced." Laura sighed. "He's grasping for redemption in the wrong place. The truth doesn't change because he can't live with it." Ethan looked at her. "Do you believe everything he said?" Her pause was deliberate. "I believe he told part of it, but not all." The 2 words, "not all," hung between them like fog. Later that night, Laura drove out to the ridge above Chautauqua Park. The sky stretched wide, filled with cold stars. She parked near the trail and stepped out, breathing in the crisp air. The place was quiet now, peaceful, but she could still feel the weight of everything that had happened here. Ryan's words replayed in her mind, soft but haunting. "She wasn't just afraid of me." He had never explained what he meant, and the investigation had found no further suspects. Yet the phrasing, so specific, so cautious, lingered like unfinished business. Laura stared into the darkness, the city lights glimmering below. "What were you afraid of, Brooke?" she murmured. "And who else knew?" Behind her, the wind shifted, rustling the dry grass along the path. For a moment she thought she heard footsteps, but it was only the echo of memory. She turned back toward her car, glancing once more at the trail. It looked ordinary now, nothing more than a strip of earth beneath the night sky. But for Laura, it would never be ordinary again, because even when justice is served, something always remains. Questions, echoes, and the kind of silence that never truly ends. It was early spring when the town of Boulder finally exhaled. The snow along the foothills had melted into silver streams, and the Flatirons stood tall under a pale morning sky. For the first time in 21 years, the story of Brooke Sanders no longer hung over the city like a shadow. It had become part of its history. Detective Laura Reeves walked through the University of Colorado campus, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. Students passed her with earbuds in, laughing, running late to class, living the same kind of ordinary life Brooke once had. She stopped near the memorial garden, where a plaque glimmered softly in the sunlight, in memory of Brooke Sanders, whose voice still speaks through truth. A bouquet of fresh wildflowers rested beneath it, and Laura knew instantly who had left them. Ethan Miller stood a few feet away, his posture reflective, a quiet strength in his stillness. He turned when he noticed her. "I didn't think I'd see you here," he said. "I wasn't sure I'd come," Laura replied, "but I guess I needed to say goodbye too." He nodded, glancing toward the plaque. "Funny thing about truth, it never really dies. It just waits for someone to listen again." Laura smiled faintly. That sounds like something Brooke would have written. She would have loved that people still talk about her, Ethan said, his tone soft but proud. Not because of how she died, but because of what she stood for. The university's journalism program had just announced the first recipient of the Brooke Sanders Fellowship, an annual grant for young investigative reporters. It was funded by the foundation Marianne had started years ago, and it ensured Brooke's legacy would continue to inspire others who believed in exposing truth, no matter the risk. Later that afternoon, Laura visited Marianne's home. The woman's face had aged, but her eyes held the same steady resilience Laura remembered. They sat together at the kitchen table, the smell of tea and lemon filling the quiet space. She would have been 34 this year, Marianne said, gazing out the window. I still think about the things she would have done, the stories she would have told. Laura reached across the table, resting her hand gently over Marianne's. She did tell a story, she said, and the world finally heard it. Marianne's eyes glistened, but she smiled. You brought her home, that's all a mother can ask. Outside, the sky turned golden, light spilling across the yard in soft waves. Laura felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of release, of peace not born from justice but from acceptance. As she drove home, the sun dipped behind the mountains, and Boulder's lights began to flicker awake. For the first time, she didn't look back at the trail where it all began. Brooke's story had come full circle. The silence that once haunted the city was now replaced by memory, by purpose. And though time would carry everyone forward, one truth would remain. Even when the world forgets, the stories worth telling never truly fade. If you believe in uncovering the truth, in remembering those who can't speak for themselves, subscribe and stay with us, because every story, no matter how cold, deserves its ending.